Hello again. This is the last of my podcasts that are all really close together because all of these books have come out on April 7th, including this one by author Liz Lawson. And the book we're talking about is The Lucky Ones, which is awesome. Again, they all are. And you're definitely going to want to put that one on your list. So it came out a few days ago. You probably have seen the craze about it. But Liz shares all about her journey to getting published, all about her book, and of course answers all of the wonderful author questions that all of the authors answer when they're on the podcast. She's lovely, so go ahead and show her some love after getting to know her here on the podcast. Well, let's just go ahead and get started, Liz. Let's have you start by telling us about your debut novel, The Lucky Ones.
So The Lucky Ones is, I can give you a little bit of a summary. It is about the aftermath of a school shooting and sort of about how these kids are struggling to put themselves back together after going through such a horrific event. It's told in dual POV. The first is a girl who is a survivor, the sole survivor of the school shooting. And her twin brother was murdered that day in the shooting. And so she's struggling with survivor's guilt and PTSD. She doesn't understand why she was the only one to walk out of the band room the day of the shooting. So she's basically just, a year after trying to find normalcy again, or what a new normal might be for her in the wake of all the tragedy that she's gone through. And Zach is the other POV. His mother decided she's a lawyer, and she took the case defending the school shooter. So wow. After that happened, he was basically alienated from all of his old friends. His girlfriend dumped him. His whole life basically was turned upside down. And he and his little sister are struggling at their new school because, they're kind of pariahs. And at the book kind of opens with the two, Zach and May, meeting, and it's about how, people heal and how you learn to survive through relationships and through love, while dealing with, the mystery of, why May was the only one who survived.
I feel like you probably hit a lot of, really heavy things in the book, which, school shooting is something that is such a part of our society, which is so terribly sad. So it's to see it and, have maybe the kids who have gone through something similar, if it's not a school shooting at the mall or wherever it happens nowadays, they can, connect with it in a different way, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah. And I also really, I wanted to write I didn't want to write it as a shooting specific book, if that makes sense. I didn't want it to be about the shooting or take place during the shooting. I think that the interesting thing is, or the sad thing is, these kids go through these terrible events and then they're left sort of just dangling. Yeah. People move on and forget that they've been through that sort of thing, and just showing kids in that place in their lives, and how there still is hope. That was a large part of what I wanted to show.
I like that idea. It's the aftermath of it and how they deal with it. And I think whether it's a school shooting or somebody could have a really traumatic thing happen in their life and how they deal with the aftermath. So I think tackling that specific portion of it is definitely one that a lot of kids probably want to read and need to read at some point in their life. Just to not feel so utterly alone in that.
Definitely.
Well, I'm excited to read it, and the cover is beautiful, and it kind of does look like your face a little bit.
Doesn't it?
My
husband, when he saw it, was like, did they base that on your face?
Yeah.
It's so funny. And then I did an ARC signing recently where I had multiple people come up to me and say that, and I was like, I guess it really does. And, it's just funny how that happens, I feel like.
Yeah, it is. But it's cool. I like your pictures where you're making, your face, you're doing the same profile as her. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yes. Well, tell us a little bit about your journey to getting published and how, that all went for you.
Well, I always find these stories fascinating because before I got an agent, I was, kind of obsessed with reading other people's journeys, because I think it's an interesting thing. We think about books as we're growing up as just these things that kind of appear, right, and not about all the work that goes into them. So The Lucky Ones was the third book I wrote in completion. I had started many, many things before finishing an entire book.
Yeah.
And the first book I wrote was a women's fiction novel. I never did anything with it. I sort of just left it on my computer and talked myself out of even like revising it. And then I guess I started writing YA when I started reading YA, and I was back in like 2010, 2011, I want to say, when it started becoming like this big thing. And all these great books started coming out. And I wrote my first YA about like 6 years ago now, 5 years ago. And I queried it. I, got some full requests, the 2 revise and resubmits, and some lovely feedback. But it was basically like, most of what I heard was this subject matter. It was about a girl who is struggling with like a lot of depression, and like suicidal thoughts. They were basically, most of the agents I heard back from were like, this is a really hard sell in terms of subject matter, but we love your writing. And it was really helpful because it made me be like, okay, there's something here, and it might not be this book, but like it gave me the desire to try again. So I started writing The Lucky Ones now about like 4 years ago, I want to say. I actually started writing it in a short story class, funnily enough. Wow. Yeah. The teacher gave us like all these prompts, which was cool, so we could just do some free writing. And the line now has been changed a little bit and stuff, but for a long time, the line from that short story class is in the book. Like, it was in there when we sold it, which is funny. So yeah, and this story just kind of like popped into my head, and I got pregnant during that time. I had a baby, so lots of life stuff happened and slowed the writing down. But once I got to querying, it was different than the first time. I got a lot of immediate interest. And then Writers House, who, I was always very interested in pursuing, like, their agents, they gave me like this, it was an exclusive revise and resubmit, which at first I was a little bit wary of, because you see people being like, don't do exclusive. But I knew that, doing this revision would really help the book. And I knew that these notes would be like invaluable, like from a professional. So I decided to do it. And I gave myself a timeline. It took 3 months. I really poured myself into it. And right about that time, actually, the Parkland shooting happened. So it made writing it feel that much more important. I mean, it was important before, and obviously it was the subject matter I was very careful with, but that just, something about it made me be like, God, this is happening way too often. And so, yeah, I mean, I took 3 months, and then luckily Andrea Morrison, my agent, accepted it and said she wanted to rep me, and then we went on submission about 3 weeks later and sold it in a week. So
what? That's crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I was like totally ready. I had steadied myself because I had heard, like, you don't even hear anything for 2 months.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, like, we definitely won't hear anything. And 2 days later, we got our first, it was a pass, but we got our first thing. And I was like, oh, that was fast. And then, like, they started happening really quickly. And I was like, okay, this is good, I think.
Yeah.
And then my now editor, Krista, after a week was like, yeah, I want to make an offer. And I was like, wow, this is great. So, and she was like, she's a wonderful editor, and I feel so lucky I ended up with her.
I think that, like you said, that you love, hearing everybody's stories and how they got an agent and their journeys. And I love it too, because it just shows that there's, like, I'm going to say there's no rhyme or reason, but sometimes there isn't. Like, it's different for everybody. Nobody jumps through the same hoops at the same time and, you know, goes through the exact same thing. So I love that sharing it, you know, can make people, if they had a similar thing in their journey, or, you know, they can be like, oh, okay, I wasn't alone in that. Or, you know, like, some people have waited years and years and years. Some people have had 4 agents and subbed a ton and all of that, and then finally get to that certain point. But I love hearing how everybody gets to, you know, where you want to be, which is publishing your debut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of my writer friends, you know, I know people who got agents through Pitch Wars, or, you know, like you said, they're on their, like, 2nd or 3rd agent, and they just sold their debut. You know, and I think so much is work, but a lot of it is timing too. You know, you have to have a subject matter that the market is interested in, and that part of it is, like, so out of your control. All you can do is, like, hang in there, basically.
And I mean, I think for, like, some people, I know that you and I've, like, tweeted about this, like, the whole having, like, an NA category. I think that, like, I have a friend who, she has this really amazing book, but it's more sort of NA. And so it's like, you have to, like, just let it sit until that becomes a possibility, because they can't sell it in the market and the way things are right now, which is hard, like a hard pill to swallow at times.
Yeah.
But, you know, it definitely depends on...
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole NA thing is, like, a whole separate conversation. Like, it is, you know, it's, like, I just feel like there's such a place, like, there's such a hole in the marketplace that nobody's taking advantage of, you know? It's like, come on, people, like, I feel like it would be so popular. Like, Red, White, and Royal Blue is a prime example of a book that falls into that age range that is, like, super popular and people love. So, I don't know.
We'll keep championing for it, and it'll happen eventually.
Exactly.
Eventually. Well, tell us a little bit about querying and how you approach querying, and, you know, any tips now going through it all, what that you would have for writers who are in that process.
So I am a person who likes to do research. I think in part because it, like, you know, I have some anxiety, and it helps to, like, quell my anxiety sometimes to feel like I'm doing something. So I really threw myself into querying. I like using Excel spreadsheets for a lot of things, and I made this, like, big Excel spreadsheet with, like, all the agents I was interested in who were also interested in YA. It had, like, their name, their agency, whether they were open to queries at the moment, how quickly they generally responded, if they had rep authors that I felt like were comps for my book, I put that on there. And then, like, you know, their query guidelines, because it's really important to follow agents' query guidelines, like, very specifically. And some of them are different. Like, some require synopses, and some don't. And nobody likes writing a synopsis. So the synopsis ones, I'm always like, maybe I'll do this later.
Those ones are always my last ones that I do, unfortunately.
Right? True, because you're like, do I have to write this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, the dreaded synopsis. And so, like, I basically took it in waves. For the first book I queried, I think I did like 10 at a time, and then I would wait, and I did mostly ones at first that were, like, pretty fast responders, because I wanted to gauge whether my query was working.
Right.
And, you know, it was the first time I'd ever written a query. So, to be honest, like, the first 10 people I queried with the first book I queried, I got 0% of people being like, we want more, because my query was not great.
Yeah.
And so it was good to, like, take it in waves, because then you can be like, okay, maybe there's something here that I need to fix. So I rewrote it, and then queried again and got a little bit better, and then I rewrote it again and queried and got a little bit better. So, you know, practice, I would say, like, practicing on a small number of people who might not be your, like, number 1 through 10 choice is a good way to approach it. So, you know, just, like, being kind of methodical about it. I used Query Tracker a lot. I like how they, like, allow you to see where other people are with their submissions to agents, especially agents that might not respond, because then you can sort of gauge whether, that person might have passed on yours or might still be holding on to it, stuff like that. But yeah, really being like methodical and detail oriented, making sure you have the agent right, the name right, their preferred pronouns are important. And again, like following their query guidelines is like very
huge.
important too.
Yeah,
huge.
I think it's really smart to do small batches. I know some people who like just send out 50 queries, like that's terrifies me, because querying is such a different type of writing than writing your book, so definitely send it in small batches, because I always find that I go back like as I'm going to send some more queries and like see something I could adjust in my query letter, just, having that time away from it. So if you find something like major, that would be kind of disappointing to be like, oh no, I sent out 50 of these, like
totally
take some more time.
Yeah. And I made that mistake kind of with my first one. I mean, I only sent it to 10, but it was like a lot of my very top choices in terms of like who I thought would be a good fit for the book. And I was like, oh, okay. Well,
what do you do? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, it's all a learning curve, I think. And like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's not necessarily, for me, it wasn't the worst thing in the world that I didn't get my first book wrapped, because I learned so much from that process. And like, so when I queried my second, when I queried the Lucky Ones, like my query was so much better than for my first book. Like I got a 50% response rate right away. And I was like, okay, I think I've like learned how to do this now. It's like anything with writing. It takes a while, it's hard.
It takes just practice, which, and exactly. I'm such an impatient person that's what I struggle with, I'm like, I want everything right now. But querying, I found that too. My a novel I have shelved, I had like the hardest time writing the query letter and just like really struggled with it over and over again, really long process. And then my novel I just finished that I've sent a few queries out for, the query letter was like a breeze, like so much easier this time. And I'm like, oh boy, that's what they say, that it gets easier the more you do it, but nobody wants to believe that.
Right, exactly. Everyone wants it like right now,
yes.
As fast as possible.
That is the world we live in.
I know. I emailed my agent earlier today actually being like, publishing is really teaching me patience. She was like, oh gosh. She was like, I'm super patient too. I think that most people are with something that matters so much to them. It's like hard to just wait around for other people. But, you're going to be waiting around. Like when you go on sub, you wait around, and then you wait around for your editor's notes, and then you wait around for their other notes. It's like a lot of it is waiting.
Oh boy. That's going to be a lot for my mind to wrap around. But I'll get there. I'll get there.
Yeah, a lot for anyone. And, the more steps you get through and the more you're waiting, the better-ish you get at it. Or, like, at least the more you understand that this is just, like, normal, I guess. Yeah. Like, this is what everybody experiences. So it's not like, why is this happening to me and nobody else?
That's good to know too, because I think, like my anxiety could rise and be like, oh no, is there something wrong with just me? But, publishing is a very slow business, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think it's good to acknowledge that it is, but it happens to everybody.
Yes, which is, why I love like our community and that everybody's really open and real about what's going on with their journey, because I think it helps us all to feel a little bit less alone on an island by ourselves.
Definitely. I agree.
Well, Liz, can you tell us, I have a two-parter for you. So can you tell us what the hardest part of writing is for you, and then what the hardest part of being an author is for you? Because sometimes they can be different.
The hardest part of writing is definitely, and I'm being reminded of this right now, drafting the first draft. Like, I am a person, sounds kind of weird, but I love revising. Like, I feel like once I get to that point, I understand the characters and I understand the book as a whole enough that I can really like see it as a world. But creating that world, it sometimes feels like I'm dragging words out of my head, like slowly out of, like molasses, like, it's like, whoa. So drafting is definitely the hardest part, of writing. And the hardest part of being an author, I mean, that's a good question. Right now, this is my first book. Being a debut author is sort of a unique thing because once that book's out, you understand, you've been through it.
Yeah.
So right now it's like the anxiety of like, oh my gosh, or how are people going to respond to this book? And I'm sure that actually is something that you always are feeling as an author, like the public response. And like, is it going to sell well enough, and like, is it going to reach the people I hope it reaches? And then also like, trying not to compare yourself to what you see other people doing or having, or, like all of that stuff is a challenge too as an author, I think, because, with social media these days, you see a lot of other people's journeys, and that's great in a lot of ways, but also can be anxiety inducing in a lot of ways, I think. And I always try to just keep in mind, like, okay, what people are showing you on social media is like, generally, unless they're talking about like their process and the anxiety of like querying or something like that, it's generally like you're going to see the best stuff.
It's the highlight reel, reel of their life.
Exactly. So it's not like all the stuff that they're disappointed that didn't happen, because that would be really kind of awkward to share, I think. Plus your agent or your editor might not be like thrilled by that.
Right.
It's more like, oh, I'm getting sent to this conference, or I'm doing this, or like I sold another book. It's like these great things. And while you're obviously happy for these people, it's easy to sometimes be like, oh, but like, am I doing okay? Am I doing enough? And I think that can be really hard. So, the way I try to do it is just, again, to remember that like all the stuff that I experience, other people probably are too, but it's just you don't see it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we live in a very comparison driven world, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So to be able to separate yourself from that and to put the rationale back in of exactly what you said, that other people are going through it, they're just not showing it all to you, is hard when you see just like the perfect curated moments of somebody's life.
Exactly. And like I think taking a step back from social media, if it is like starting to overwhelm you, is always a really solid thing to do.
Yeah.
Like I think mental health is like something you need to protect, and so there's no harm in doing that. And like, I think as a debut author, it can be hard because you feel like you need to constantly be like shouting about your book or just putting yourself out there. And 2 weeks off is not going to hurt anything long term. So no. Like, if you need a couple weeks, I think that's a good thing.
I think so too. And I think even in the wonderful community we have, there have been times where I'm just like, even just too consumed with the social media that I'm like, mm-hmm. Not paying attention to things I should. I think taking a break is super helpful, and nobody's going to fault you for it. It's not going to make or break anything. It's just way more important to take care of yourself,
Agreed. Absolutely.
Well, yeah. Well, let me flip that question on you. So we talked about the hardest parts. Let's talk about the best parts. So what's the best part of being a writer and the best part of being an author?
I mean, I think the best part of being a writer is after you pull those words out of your brain, you put them on you type them or you write them down on a piece of paper, and I love like the next day after I've written to like go back and read it, because it's almost magical to me. I'm like, how did I do this? Like, yeah. And when people ask me like, what's your writing process? I'm like, honestly, I have no idea. Like, I think I black out. I don't know. So I think the best part is rereading something that you've written and being like, wow, like, this is good. And thinking that of your own writing is important, like, if you don't believe in yourself, then like, it's going to be hard for other people too.
Yeah.
And I think that, the best part is that like rereading of words. And the best part of being an author, I mean, I'm only just starting to experience this, but like having people read your book and be like, this really touched me. This, like, I related to this because of things I've been through, and like, my book is about really serious stuff, and I've had a couple people who have read it who have been like, I have PTSD, and I think that you've done a really good job with your portrayal of that, and, that is, and being like, I can relate to this, and it's like, I don't know, I think that it's sort of the connection that your book can make to people is really the best part.
I think so too. I mean, it's why we do it, and I think a lot of us who are writers, we're readers first and fell in love with books and connected with books in that way, to where we're like, okay, I can do this. I can tell a story and have somebody connect with it. So to actually have that validated and your words really touch someone, I'm sure is a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it's just, it makes you be like, okay, this is why I do this.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. This is why you black out when you're writing your first draft.
This is why I pull those words. It's like, it feels sometimes like nails on a chalkboard. You're just like, oh God.
Yeah, I totally know how that feels.
Get out of me.
Yeah, and I'm doing a first draft right now, and I'm like, how did I ever do this? Like, how have I written 3 books? This is the hardest thing I've ever done.
Right? It's so, I know. I haven't drafted in a while, and I'm similar. Like, I'm starting a first draft, and I'm like, wow, right. This was not easy.
Nope. Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about your writing process and blacking out. I love to, there's being a pantser and being a planner. So I just love to, kind of see what works best for you. Are you more of a pantser, a planner, or somewhere in between?
I've always told myself I was a pantser, because I definitely am not like a plotter. Like, I don't sit down and write out like the entire plot. I wish I did. My husband wishes I did. but I find it really boring to plot, which is, whatever. I wish that I didn't. It would make my life so much easier if I didn't feel that way. But I generally, like, in the past have always kind of written my way into the story and then hit about like maybe the 50% mark, and then I'm like, oh wait, what am I doing? I have no idea. And then I'll like maybe go back and figure out where I've come from, and then sort of like not plot from there, but sort of plan a little bit. Like, okay, like this is what's already happened. Where am I in terms of like a story arc? And then where am I going to go from here? But it helps me to already know the characters, know the world, because then I can understand where they're going. Right now, for the first time, I have had to write a synopsis before the book, and that is really hard.
I can imagine.
A challenge. I'm doing my best, but it's hard because I'm like, I don't feel like I know the characters well enough quite yet to like understand their journey. And I know that the synopsis can change and like things can change and all of that, but sometimes it feels like when I'm writing a synopsis that it's like writing it in stone,
I feel like the exact same way.
Happen.
Yeah.
And you're like, it gives me like anxiety, yeah. So it's maybe changing my writing process a little bit because I'm being forced to be a planner more than I ever have. But I'm trying to keep an open mind about it and be like, it's flexible. Things might change. Who knows?
I think that when you've like thought it all out and written a synopsis, it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't feel flexible. I used to like plan hardcore and like have a really detailed outline, but then I would be drafting the story and I'd be like, that doesn't feel right anymore, once I got to know my characters a little bit more. But I was like, but I've spent all this time doing this outline, I need to stick with it. So there's definitely something to be said for every way people draft, but I think you probably like the revision process more because that's when you can go in and like do a little bit more of the fixing and putting all the pieces together. I enjoy doing that. But yeah, writing a synopsis before drafting sounds a little bit scary to me.
It's really hard. It's really hard. I also kind of think that I'm a chronic underwriter. Like my first drafts tend to be on the shorter side, like around 60,000 words. For the lucky ones, I think in revision, in total, I would say I've added like 25,000 words, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like with those like sparser first drafts, I'm kind of outlining by writing a book, which is, I don't know. But yeah, writing a synopsis, oof,
Yeah.
it is hard at any stage.
It is at any stage. Even after you've written the whole book, to write a synopsis is still so difficult.
Oh my God, so difficult.
Well, tell us a little bit about your love of writing and where that kind of all began for you.
You know, it's funny, when I first did my book, people were like, have you always written? And I was like, I don't know, maybe. And then I went home, I went to my parents' house last Christmas and was like looking in my closet because my mom never throws anything away. And I found all of these notebooks from when I was in like middle school and lower school that were like full of short stories. I wrote like Babysitter's Club fan fiction, like all of this stuff. And I was like, oh, I have always written. And my parents were like, yes, you always have. Like, where did you get this idea that you didn't? So honestly, I think it was just kind of, it just gradually grew from like birth, kind of. I was always somebody who loved reading. Like, I was always the person who would read like a book a week. Like, my parents would have to limit my reading time because of homework. And I guess I always, it's kind of like what I've heard other people say, where you start writing in other people's voices. Like, I remember I loved Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and like, it's, the writing is like kind of kooky, you know, and like I wrote for a little while in that sort of kooky voice, and then it was like The Princess Bride, and that sort of like that sort of like humorous voice. And it, you know, you go through these stages, and then you kind of from that find your own voice, which is cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's you know, I think the reasons people write are very different, and it starts for people at, you know, different ages always, like, so different. But I have lots and lots of stories and, you know, half-finished little documents and all that from when I was younger. And it's cool to just go back and read them and be like, okay, I've come a long way. Like, I have always loved it, but to see, like, your progression through all of it is pretty cool.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? It's pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's really cool because you see how much you've learned.
Yeah.
By doing it, which is, you know, I don't know. It's like you think you're just existing in this bubble and like you're writing the same way you always have, but it's just not true.
No, you get better. And I love too, what I love about like being a beta for you know, my author friends and being a CP is seeing like their transition too, like how much better it gets each time and how different things are. It's like, you don't want to hear it, like we talked about, the practice makes perfect and that you get better as you go along, but it's really true. You just got to keep writing for it to happen.
I know, and that's like, it's the most, I would say, frustrating part about writing books, because like, you know, you think like, I mean, it takes a long time to write a book, and then you're like finished and you're like, oh, it's, you know, not that great, to be honest. And then you're like, the only way I can like do this is to do it again, I guess. You know, you really have to have it in you.
Yes.
And you have to like want it.
Yes, you have to persevere and push through like the impatience of it to get it done, because it can take so long to even just do the first draft. But you know, revisions can take a while because usually, like, I mean, I feel like I do like at least 3 rounds of revisions on each book, and that is time consuming.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you do revisions before you query, and then once you query and get an agent, you do revisions, then you revise again, and then, I mean, it's like just constant. So yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about your revision process and what that looked like for you, maybe before you started querying and got your agent, because you know, we know it changes once you have your agent and your editor, who are so crucial in that process. But what did you do on your own, and you know, what were the major things that you did with your manuscripts before you queried?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was never a good reviser until I got that revise and resubmit for the lucky ones. Like, I always was sort of the person who would revise as I wrote, which is also why it takes me so long to draft, I think.
Yeah.
Because I am a little bit of a perfectionist, and if I know that there's something wrong, like wrong in quotes with something that I've written. I like can't just leave it. Like I hear people just being like, I just fast draft, and I'm so jealous of them because I wish I could do that and just like pour it out of my brain. So, you know, before I revised the Lucky Ones from that letter, I reread it, and I like changed some stuff that I thought needed to be changed, and like did a sentence level sort of revision, but like big picture revising was always hard for me. And I think it's gotten, since getting like professional notes, it has changed the way I revise, because now I can see what to look for.
Yeah.
And I think I think figuring that out on your own is one of the hardest things for a writer, because you kind of write this thing in a vacuum. And I think that the most important thing any person before they start querying can do is to get, like you said, CPs, like other people to read your work who are like fresh eyes, who read similar things, who hopefully are writers, because like I think that writers uniquely understand the structure of a book in a way maybe a casual reader doesn't. Yeah. Although I do know people whose CPs aren't aspiring authors. They just are good readers, I guess. But somebody who understands that structure and understands character, and you know, that was something I never did. I was always like totally suffering from imposter syndrome, so I never like really had other aspiring authors as critique partners. I had like my parents and my husband, who to be fair is a screenwriter, so he does understand structure and he's very helpful with that.
That's good.
And then my sister, who was always like, this is good, and I'm like, thanks. But I would say don't do what I did. Like, definitely, you know, get involved with like other writers and like have those eyes, because those are vital, just vital.
I think so too, and I think even if, because I think that can be like the scariest part, is even with like other writer friends you trust, sharing your work is like, so I know that there are some online programs too that you think you have to pay for, but that will kind of scan through and look for different things like passive and active voice and all those different things. So if you are really scared at first, just to get the first run through, you know, you could go through something like that. But betas and CPs are just super wonderful. Super, you know, it's just that people take the time to do that for you is pretty lucky, I think.
It really is. Yeah, I mean, there are great resources. Like Manuscript Academy has like, you know, it is like pay, but I think you can, up to 50 pages even, have an agent look at your work and tell you what's working and what isn't. And it's like almost invaluable. If, you know, I feel like they have like a scholarship program too, which is pretty great.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if it's not in your budget, then try and find something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people will tell you, you know, like hire your own editor and go through copy edit and developmental edit, and while that is like so wonderful, yes, that can be really expensive and not in everybody's wheelhouse.
Agreed. And it's like not necessary. You know, there are so many people out there who are just like so enthusiastic about writing, and like who you could find as critique partners. Yeah. Like, you know, like writers are so nice, and they like understand, most writers, and they understand like the process and like the vulnerability, if I can say that word, that you feel when you give somebody else your writing. It's like you feel like you're just exposed. And so, I mean, I think that there are so many people out there that could be really helpful for somebody looking for somebody to help them with the revision.
I think so too. I think that the one thing that when I joined, like, you know, Twitter, really got into it and joined and found this really great writing community, I was so surprised, I think, about how supportive everybody was. You know, like when somebody got an agent or, you know, got a full request or got a book deal, and it's the sort of thing, well, yeah, sometimes, you know, you get that imposter syndrome, like, oh my gosh, why isn't that happening to me? But I think that for the most part, everybody is just so supportive because, well, they want that to happen for themselves, they're not going to be like mad. And it's not like as cutthroat that it's happening for somebody else, which I think is just the wonderful thing about our community, is that you can reach out and post a random tweet and find somebody who you wouldn't have connected with to, work and just have some fresh eyes on your novel, which is a really cool thing.
Definitely. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
We're pretty lucky. And, I'm excited to, have the lucky ones come out and see how that goes, and to, see how book 2 goes for you. And that's going to be about.
Book 2.
Book 2. Well, my last question is my favorite. I love to know what your favorite book is right now. This isn't your favorite book of all time by any means, just a book you read recently that you really loved.
So I've been lucky enough to be reading a lot of the 2020 debuts that are going to come out next year, because we have like a little ARC tour thing that we all do. I mean, you don't have to sign up, but a lot of people do. And I've read a few really great ones. It's hard to just choose one.
I know.
I know, but I would say If These Wings Could Fly by Kyrie McCauley is so great. It comes out, I'm trying to remember exactly. I think she's spring of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, I just looked. March 3rd, 2020 by Catherine Teagan. And, I mean, this book, it's like magical realism-ish, but mostly contemporary. Her writing is stunning. Like, I described it to friends as being like, I mean, I don't knock on wood, and Kyrie would probably be like, please don't say this, but like, this is a book that you like feel like would win awards. Like, it's just beautiful. And I can't recommend it enough. Like, awesome. I absolutely loved it. And by the time you guys are listening to this, it will be out. So go look for it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love getting, those recommendations, because I know we all have so many things we want to read, but we still inevitably miss books that come out, right? That you would be on your list. So yeah, that one looks wonderful, and I will have to keep my eye out for it.
Yeah, do. I mean, I can't say enough about it. I absolutely loved it.
Perfect. Did you have another one you wanted to share?
I mean, I could share so many. The Silence of Bones is really great by June Hur. That's coming out, I think, also in March next year. Maybe it's February of 2020. It's a historical book, and I haven't read a ton of historicals before I read June's, and especially YA. I like historical, adult books more.
Yeah.
And it's just really great. It's like a historical mystery.
Ooh.
That's set, I know, and it's set in 1800s Korea. And it's just really interesting because you get to see like the culture back then. June is Korean, and it's like, so kind of own voices in that way. And it's just, her writing is beautiful. The plot is really interesting. She does a great job with like twisting and turning the mystery. Yeah, I love that one too.
Liz, thank you so much for chatting with me and telling us about your novel, The Lucky Ones, and sharing all about your journey to getting where you are now.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much for listening. The usual spiel: rate, review, share, tell your friends about it, go show Liz some love, let her know you listened to it, and make sure to, promote her book and help get the word out there about it. See you next time.